So the uncinate process, we know, it's very clear, we know that there are multiple attachments. 80% of the attachments of the vertical part of the frontal of the uncinate process is to the lamina preparation. 80%. So that's the frontal outflow tract is medial to the uncinate. Look at that. That's the uncinate attaching the lamina preparation, and this is the frontal outflow tract. See, that's the uncinate attaching to the lamina, and this is the frontal outflow tract. First of all, I want you to see how narrow it is, and second, see how close to the middle turbinate it is, how close to the lateral lamella of the middle turbinate it is. Okay, it's not close to the orbit; it's closer to the middle turbinate. So this is the outflow tract, and this space which is formed inside the uncinate over here is the recessus terminalis. So when I was learning first, everything looked like the frontal sinus. The frontal recess looked like a frontal sinus, the supraorbital cell looked like, the suprabular recess looked, everything looked like the frontal sinus. Ye frontal sinus, wo frontal, everything was the frontal sinus. So remember that you can get a recessus terminalis, which is a blind pouch, but the frontal sinus outflow tract is medial, 80% of times medial to the uncinate, between the uncinate and the middle turbinate, and close to the middle turbinate. Now I want you to remember this fact because this has a very big bearing on surgery. Okay, how the surgery will go. In fact, all these facts, what you are talking about, are actually, we're going to put them all together when this, whatever information we are gathering together, we're going to put it together for surgery. Okay, how each of these facts impacts surgery. And then of course you can have it attached to the skull base like this. So this is attached to the skull base, this is attached to the middle turbinate on either side. And if it is attached to the skull base or middle turbinate, as in 20% of times, then the frontal outflow tract is lateral to the uncinate. Lateral. But this happens only in 2 out of 10 cases. So now we've discussed the agonizing cell as well as the uncinate process. Now we need to know what is the relationship between the agonizing cell and the uncinate. Okay. Now I'm going to show you something. Okay, I'm not drawing everything, I'm just drawing the bulla. Well, suppose this is the bulla, and behind the bulla is the ground lamina, right? So if the ground lamina is separate from the bulla, then you get a retrobullar recess, right? If the bulla is separate from the skull base, you get a suprabullar recess. And then if both are there, then you get the hiatus semilinaris superioris and the lateral sinus. Okay, but more importantly, what I'm talking about right now is not the skull base or thing. I'm just talking about the fact that there can be a space between the bulla and the ground lamina. But sometimes there's no retrobullar recess, and the posterior wall of the bulla is the same or is fused to the ground lamina. Can you understand that? So when you go through the posterior wall of the ground bulla, you are already gone beyond the ground. This happens quite often, right? So this is what you need to do. Now, a similar thing happens with the agar and the uncinate, and that is, we know that the agonizing cell is anterior here, and we know that the uncinate lies behind it. So there are times when the uncinate is separate and the agonizing cell is separate. And therefore, when you go through the anterior wall of the agonizing cell, you're in the frontal recess. And then you go through the posterior wall of the agonizing cell, and then you will see the uncinate. Okay, that can happen. But sometimes that is not what is there. Can you see from there what I'm drawing? Is that there is an agonizing cell, and the posterior wall of the agonizing cell is fused with the uncinate. And therefore, there's no space between them. So when you go through the agonizing cell and you go through the posterior wall of the agonizing cell, you've already removed the upper part of the uncinate. Is that clear? So that's what we are going to talk about just now.
In this condition,
yeah,
the while we are removing the vertical part of the uncinate process by using polypod
Yeah. Yeah.
it might be possible that we are like also damaging the posterior wall of the agarines.
Yeah, so what you're doing is when you're removing the, so first of all, if there's an agonized cell, go through the agonized cell. Don't try and find the uncinate. So if you're going through the posterior wall of the agonized cell, yes, there's a chance that you're actually going through the uncinate also. So that is what you need to know, ki when you're removing the cell and if you don't see an uncinate, that's because both of them were fused, and when you remove the posterior wall of the agonized, you also remove the upper part of the uncinate. Does that make sense? So there will be times when you will remove the posterior wall of the agonist and you'll see the uncinate. But there will be times when you remove the posterior wall of the agonist and you'll not see the uncinate. Okay? Now does that make sense?